Critical thinking. So this is our last class today. So nothing going on next week except for final exam week. You use that time to study, put together your 3x5 card, other things. And this you have the final take. If you want to take the extra credit, send me a Moodle message if you can't get it done by Friday, which is the deadline for the extra credit exam. If you send me a Moodle message, I can just grant an exception if you want to take it during finals week. Just make sure when you go in there to tell them which exam you want, because if you don't specify, they'll just serve you up the final. And if you're not ready for the final, it's going to be bad if you're in the middle of it, you're like, this doesn't look like the extra credit test. So make sure to tell them what test you want. You get a 3x5 card notes, same as before. There'll be a curve, same as before. The extra credit exam only counts, and again, by the way, without extension, that's tomorrow, 5 o'clock is when the lab closes. So the extra credit exam only counts if you've taken both the first midterm exam and the second midterm exam. So if you've already taken both those exams, and if you haven't, you should talk to me if you haven't already, then you can take the extra credit exam and see if you can beat one of the two. If you don't score better than either one, then there's no effect. So there's no downside, and there's, it's like Pascal's wager, right? It's a bet you can't lose. So the worst you can do is maybe, I suppose a personal disappointment, yeah. Maybe, but there's not going to be effect on your grade. So we're going to finish talking about I think some more about thinking critically about news and politics. Maybe finish that up and talk a little bit about thinking critically about government. It's one of my favorite topics, and then move into thinking about I call this critical thinking critically about your life, and maybe just touch a little bit on critical thinking in everyday life and practical decision making. And then we'll spend the whole second hour doing some reviewing for the final. Okay, so, there's one thing I wanted to talk about. Let's see. I think I'll call this up on our middle page. I meant to talk about this a couple of weeks ago. This might be overkill, but I want to cover my bases. Just in case somebody didn't see my announcement. Okay, I could have just gone with the middle link. Just gabbing before class about old girlfriends instead of getting up my stuff. Hallelujah. Okay. Should get the right one. It's a meta course. The final, I bumped it up to 5 o'clock because I have an appointment at 3, and it's doing some testing to make sure you could look at your answers afterwards. And so there's some attempts there I have to blow out, and that kept me from uploading my question and blah, blah. So it'll be available at 5 today. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So if you're chomping at the bit to take it today, so I apologize if you're planning on running out after class and taking it, but it'll be available by 5. And I want to give myself some leeway there to work out the kinks. And that will cover everything after the informal fallacies. So thinking critically about religion, about ethics, about news and politics, and the stuff we do today. So this announcement. This key question on second midterm. This is on the practice test too. So I just wanted to reiterate this for the record. So this is a miskeyed question. This is an example I actually used in class, and I read this out verbatim in class. This example. Did you hear that the leader of this new transgender bathroom ordinance here in Charlotte is a registered sex offender? I'm voting no, and so should you. right? So then the question is, this is a argument is an example of, and previously I had keyed this as the correct answer.
I got that one right because I remembered that you keep that right on the practice test.
A strong argument that the ordinance will lead to a rise in sexual molestations and assaults. And we so even if, and I have some, so you can look at the announcements for all the details about why this first answer is incorrect. If you're paying attention in class, I would hope that you remember this was given example as the ad hominem fallacy, which is a correct answer. And I didn't penalize anybody for putting A because that was what was on the practice test, right? And also because I generally, if I rekey anything, I don't want anybody's score to go down because it's, you know, you take a test and you get a score and you have your instructor say, oh, I miskeyed that question, your score's actually lower now. That kind of sucks. That wouldn't be fair. So I added 2 points to the curve. So even people that got this right end up getting, you know, a couple more points. And people that got it wrong, there's no change to your score. So, but anyway, I just want to make this clear. People are sensitive about these issues of sexual orientation and gender identity and all this stuff. So this, again, I talk about sensitive topics in this class because that's what people talk about in their normal life. Like people talk about the news, they talk about politics, they talk about you know, cultural changes going on around us. And what that means, and you see some new, you know, the gender-inclusive bathrooms. You see, well, what's up with this, you know? And people talk about it. So this is something I thought would be a good example of an ad hominem fallacy, because actually a lot of this stuff is stuff I hear, right? People make these arguments. People that I know in real life, people on Facebook, people in the media. You know, people on Twitter, they all this stuff. I'm like, ooh, that's good for that fallacy, and I grab it and I use it. So anyway, just so you know, that is not. You should recognize this is not a strong argument. And I should say too, if on the practice exam or the regular exam, if you see some question that doesn't look like it's right, like I go over these things afterwards, but I'm stretched a little thin here going back to graduate school. So, you know, occasionally one of these things will slip through and I'll make the correction. So if you notice something like this that doesn't seem quite right, feel free to shoot me a Moodle message or come by my office and talk to me about it. Also, if there's anything, I suppose it's a little late in coming, maybe I should put this in my syllabus, I thought this was sort of an understood rule that if there's something about the class that's bothering you or something that you feel like they need to treat differently or what have you, or something, if you feel something's being done in a discriminatory fashion or biased fashion, you know, I'm open to criticism and feedback. And also the student evaluations are open too, so you can find those, I think, I'll send out a link on Moodle for those, because I don't see those until after the term's over. So, and I do look at those, so feel free to give me your 2 cents on that, or, you know, give me a great evaluation, or hammer me, right? I have no idea who. What's that? On Moodle? It's on, I think it's on, it used to be on MyLane. I think there's a link there now. I just got a link sent out today. They have this guy in CIT, Joseph Colton, like he did this thing in Unix, and it's like really good. It's this new tool, and it's versatile, and he did it for the college for free. And said basically, don't screw it up, and you can use it all you want, and here it is. So I'll send out a link later tonight or tomorrow morning for doing the evaluation, just as a reminder. Okay, let's get to some real stuff here. So I like critical thinking. Like, you know, you think about what is critical thinking, and just go back to the beginning, right? It's trying to figure out what's true. There are all these roadblocks to trying to figure out what's true about the world. First of all, there's this ridiculous idea of relativism, which is a form of intellectual laziness, which has been institutionalized in our education system, unfortunately, that says what you believe is true for you. And it's part of this kind of cultural malaise that competition is bad and that you hurt somebody's self-esteem by telling them that they're wrong. And so everybody gets a trophy and safe spaces and worry about people's feelings. And part of that is you can't tell somebody they're wrong. And God forbid you say there's something that's screwed up about their culture or the place they come from, or even that there are differences between cultures, whether you make a value judgment about it or not. Yeah.
Wouldn't saying that you can't say someone is wrong be saying that their action is wrong?
Say that again.
If someone were to say that you're not allowed to say something is wrong, wouldn't that be telling the person that doing so would be wrong?
Oh yeah, so yeah, it's wrong for you to say that somebody else is wrong. Yeah, so it's kind of, and this is the whole problem with relativism, is that it's self-referentially incoherent. So if you say there is no such thing as absolute truth, a logical reply might be, well, what about the idea that there's no such thing as absolute truth? Is that idea true, or is that just is that just your truth, right? So you go around and it's this sort of weird logical game, and it's like, no, that there are objective truths about the world. There's objective truths about material reality, and if there are ethical truths, those are objective too. You could argue about whether if morality just boils down to culture, then I suppose it could be objective too, right? Because okay, this is your culture. Let's go to Gallup.com. What do the majority of people in your culture believe? Okay, that's what you should believe. What should you do in this tough moral dilemma? You're thinking about, your girlfriend has an unwanted pregnancy. The two of you are trying to figure it out, right? And then the question is what should you do? Well, www.gallup.com. What do Americans think about abortion in the first trimester? Oh, they think it's okay. Okay, problem solved, right? And if you think about that, you think about your views about whatever it is, gay marriage or abortion or legalizing drugs or government spending or whatever. If you just it's kind of weird that you look at opinion polls, because those people might not know any more than you do, right? They might even be stupider than you. And so you just look at a mass of people and try to figure out for what's right and what's good. You're just going to see I don't know, what does everybody else think? It's abdicating personal responsibility, and it's abdicating critical thinking. And so so you have this problem where people try to avoid personal responsibility. People don't like thinking about unpleasant things. Ever since you're so high, the government programs you to believe certain things. There's compulsory education, so your parents ship you off to the government school where you are learning something that goes along with the government line. And there's certain cultural things, and so now we have the media, so you can look at different cultures, and we have access to lots of information. But people who are ensconced in a particular culture tend to think of that culture as doing things right, and everybody else is screwed up. That's human nature. That's how people are socialized. So there's a big roadblock, right? Then you have all these psychological mechanisms, you grow up and you think, I'm going to die someday. Maybe a relative dies, and death grabs you by the throat, and you think, oh, that's going to be me someday. And you start thinking, well, maybe there's a God. I hope there is. I'm going to believe there is, because the idea that there's not is just too terrible, right? So there are these psychological defense mechanisms that make you go with the status quo, that make you think that your own beliefs that you had since you were a child are true, that you tend to think about your beliefs as part of your identity. So instead of seeing them as a tool for figuring out reality, they become part of who you are. And then if someone tries to help you, I'm thinking about my first wife. my ex-wife, we were, my friends tried to tell me that the relationship was a disaster that would end disastrously, and it was this was a bad thing bad relationship for me to be into. But I don't want to hear any of it, right? But I love her, right? And so all the things that they raised to me, I'm like, are you sure that's I would downplay all the bad attributes she had and upplay all the good attributes, and disastrously. And so I engaged in defensiveness, rationalization, and it led to all kinds of cascading disastrous effects in my life. I won't go into any of the gory stories, but it got pretty bad. Even after the divorce went through, I decided to try to help her out, and hilarity ensued. So you think about that as far as like all the things like, true love can blind you. Your need to have meaning and purpose can make you buy into a belief system that will give you those things, give you a psychological payoff. You have this tendency to rationalize all the things you already believe and to suppress doubts and to try to ignore things. So all these things coming at you, getting in the way of you having an accurate picture of the truth. And then there's, the news and politics, right? So there's a whole other thing. So you growing up in your school system, you have various kinds of biases, and so you get the kind of left-wing bias because, the teachers are members of the NEA, at least in Oregon, whether they want to be or not. It's, has a left-wing orientation. They're unionized employees and safe middle-class jobs. So you kind of get some left-wing ideas mixed in with a kind of authoritarianism. And all the rules that go along with the compulsory school system we get from John Dewey and some other people way back when that said put the desks in nice little rows and have everybody sit up straight and have lots of rules and teach people to be obedient and then teach them all this sort of teach them the basics and then don't make them think too hard. And then you get this sort of more activist thing where the idea is that schools are ways to socialize kids into believing in diversity and radical environmentalism and the cause of the day and have them write. I remember teachers, you occasionally see, let's all write angry letters to the president and tell him why he sucks. And so you get lots of different things, or let's bring in like the drag queens to grade schoolers to teach them that there's no differences between the genders. So you get lots of kind of wackiness in education, not dealing with sort of basic skills, and then trying to propagandize kids into believing certain things and behave certain ways. So all those things get in the way of having an objective view of the world. And and in other countries it's even worse, right? You have like totalitarian countries like North Korea. You have kind of totalitarian light countries like China, which is also authoritarian, but maybe not as, but certainly not as brutal as North Korea, where people have a lot more freedom. But in every country you have a particular culture, there's a particular system, and it all has an effect on the way you see things. And then there's your personal history and your family and the things you like and the things you don't like, just based on your experiences. And so being objective is really, really hard. So that's why thinking critically is so important. And a big part of thinking critically is stepping back, saying, okay, am I being objective? Am I looking at the facts? Am I letting these irrational biases cloud my judgment? Is this objectively the right thing? Okay, this is the way I see things. How does the person on the other side see things? So all those things are super important. And then if you have an accurate picture of the world, then you're more likely to be successful in life. And you're more likely, say politically, to help create a successful society for those around you. So you produce a better society by advocating for certain views that are going to be helpful. I remember this one guy, he was like a Jehovah's Witness, and he went door to door for 20 years trying to convince people to become Jehovah's Witnesses. And then he had this sort of conversion experience where he came to the belief that the Jehovah's Witness religion was a non-Christian cult. So he spent the rest of his life, he's probably passed on now, going door to door to the same doors he went to try to convince them that Jehovah's Witnesses was a cult and to tell them about the real Jesus. So it was, so the thing is, when you think about critical thinking, it's important to figure out things, when you're starting out in life. Otherwise, you might have to go back and do things over. And it's all part of the experience. But it's better not to have to trace back your steps and start all over again. End up lots of people at Syracuse. There are a lot older students when I was there. They were seminary dropouts. And they got like halfway through seminary and then came to the realization or the belief, let me say, that there isn't a God. Like, oops, there's 3 years of my life I'm not going to get back. So it's important to try to think about these things again in an objective manner. And so I'm trying to kind of like poke and prod at you with some things that maybe you haven't been exposed to, or that call attention to certain kind of biases that are so institutionalized and so accepted that people don't think about them as being biases at all. They think about, well, it's just how people are. And I don't know if you've known, like, it depends on what circle you run into, but people say, well, I don't know how X got elected. I didn't vote for him, and I don't know any of my friends that did. And that, people tend to hang around people that are like them and have similar views. And particularly if you're in a particular job, or here in academia or other places, or even if you're in like the deep South, right? You get a whole different, there's a whole different thing where everybody around you is like a Christian of some sort, and so whether they're fundamentalist or nominal, and you sort of, you have opposite biases maybe of some place like Eugene, which is a lot more bohemian and multicultural and open maybe, and less religious. But I think the tendency, though, is to think, oh, well, those people in Texas, they're just like a bunch of like crazy religious fundamentalism, and they grew up with it, and it's all they know. But me, here in Eugene, I'm completely objective. And then to take all the parts about like liberal Northwest culture and academia and make that the norm and say, well, this is just how things are. It's not, I don't have any biases. Okay, so going back to, I think thinking critically about politics. I'm trying to think. I'll have a few questions on these videos here and the readings. Maybe I'll cover this stuff during the review. I kind of like to talk about this everyday anarchy thing. So basically, these things in the media just basically say the mainstream media is extremely left-wing. So you think about, and again, I'm not endorsing a particular political ideology or indicting one, but when you're making political judgments, you should keep in mind that the media, the Hollywood, the educational system, and the legal system, I'll say too, and increasingly corporate America in their like human resources policies and so on, it's extremely left wing, and so Silicon Valley, which controls social media, extremely left wing, and it's not like they're personally left wing and it doesn't affect policies. Facebook and Twitter take steps to try to bury unfavorable news coverage. And Mark Zuckerberg's thinking about running for president, and they have like algorithms that bury stories, and there's people who've worked at those places that come out and say, yeah, these guys are, they're biased and they bury conservative stories and push up liberal stories. And they even had a big summit they invited some conservatives in there to try to show that they're kind of try to be responsive to bias. And I would say as a PR stunt, but they had some people like Jim DeMint come in there and they consulted them about what do conservatives think. But it's because they got caught, with their hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, having an algorithm which promoted more liberal and progressive stories and buried conservative ones. Yes, sir.
Is liberal and left and right, is that just how we describe things relative to this exact moment in time? I mean, for example, back when small children were in car factories using their tiny arms to reach into certain parts and clean them, they lost an arm. There's no workman's comp. They just got kicked out the door. They're like, oh, you're fired. You can't work here anymore. Like those, laws protecting that kind of thing came up because of, I guess, did those laws come up from what would have been considered the left back then, like progressive, or is that not what the right and the left is like?
Oh, I think, generally speaking, and it's tough because the left-right dichotomy, I mean, it has problems with it, looking at things that way. But generally I mean, but there's some usefulness in talking about. So you make a good point about like child labor laws. So you might think, well, what's the role of government in regulating business? And you might think, well, having safety standards and making it so children don't have lose digits or limbs in factory work is probably, you think that's a good thing. Yeah. So the question is that like a left-wing idea? I'd say it'd be left-wing or liberal idea, and maybe like one that is sort of sensible, a progressive idea, and I'm sort of using these interchangeably. The right wing and left wing comes from like the French legislature, where you had the kind of the elite aristocracy on one side, and then like the people's house on the other side, that made of the commoners, which is kind of, I mean, if you look at the liberal conservative divide, it's kind of weird to think about that as being right wing and left wing, because the established, so if you think about it's elites versus the commoners, like the GOP is made up of a lot of like sort of working class and middle class people, and the elites that live on the coast, particularly wealthy people, they tend to be more liberal and progressive in their views. It's because wealthy people tend to be urban people, and urban people tend to be more liberal, and then the people in the heartland, like in the middle, you look at the electoral map for the last presidential election, and like the middle of the country, it's red, red, red. It's a bunch of Republicans. On the coast, blue, 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 blue. A bunch of Democrats. And you look at like the people that work at Goldman Sachs and the Citibank and all the like the Silicon Valley, and these people with more money than God, they tend to be liberal or progressive and Democrats. So that dichotomy, whereas people that I think that are professionals that are kind of middle class or upper middle class might tend more towards republicanism. The other thing that's odd is you have sort of because the Democrats are also play the identity politics game, so like minorities regardless of economic status, African Americans to a certain extent, Hispanics will typically vote for Democrats regardless of geographic location, socioeconomic status, and so on. I suppose the Democrats would say, well, it's because the Republicans are racist and they drive them away.
It seems like the Democrats seem to be more like mass populations tend to be, larger groups of people tend to be like Democrats, where the smaller groups of people tend to go to Republicans. Like Republicans seem to be like independent character traits.
That's true, and that's like the big part of the left-right divide. That seems to me that's why it's the sort of green again. Maybe next term the person that goes before me won't. Let's see, left, right, liberal. Conservative. And this is sort of generally speaking, like his political philosophy, the liberals tend to like, sort of a larger government, meaning more and more regulation, more taxation. Also a large scope, like the things the government does, and the small scope. The right, the military, and sort of religion. This is about maybe coalitions. And then the left sort of tend to be anti-military and secular.
What party tends to find themselves like in the middle of the left and the right?
Oh, it's a moderate or centrist.
It wouldn't be independent?
Yeah, the center or independent. Independent has to do with political parties, though. So,
Oh.
Democrat, Republican. You get conservative Democrats and you get liberal Republicans.
Oh, okay.
And then a big part of like the the right is you have like this is sort of like the individual. Let me get another page here. Left and the right. This is the big thing I see, or the collectivist versus individualist approach. And this goes along with the limited government or expansive government, and the idea that the left have this idea that the government is there to protect us from the evil corporations and also to help people that can't help themselves, and so they want a big welfare state. They also don't trust people to make their own decisions, so they support like the nanny state, and so the government's going to either nag you or prohibit certain things, like they're going to, Mayor Bloomberg passes the tax on. He's a Republican, by the way, but he's also a liberal. So he's like, well, kids are getting too fat. What do we do? Let's put a tax on soda. Well, it's like actually let's pass a law that says you can't buy a 32-ounce soda. The biggest you get is 16 ounce because too much sugar is bad for you. Right, so then and that's a sort of the school marm approach to politics, Andy Bloomberg. So that's an example of kind of government paternalism that the left generally supports. Bans on trans fat, trying to Michelle Obama trying to make kids eat carrot sticks and broccoli and stuff like that, and trying to change the school lunch program to contain healthier food, and threatening fast food joints that if you don't offer alternatives, we're going to regulate you and punish you. So that's kind of the same idea. So the idea is that government is there to help you. They're there to make things better. People are going to make terrible choices. So the government's there to threaten, cajole, nag, prod you, or nudge you in the right direction. Whereas the right-wing approach is like hands off. People get to make their own choices for good or ill. Maybe a minimal safety net, take care of people that are really down and out. But that's like very few people, and they tend to think churches and charities should take care of those people. And the idea is that you're in control of your own destiny. You get to make your own choices, and you're also responsible for your own choices. Whereas the left tends to see people as victims of social forces, of institutions, and not really responsible for their actions. And so this is old Democrat politician Dick Gebhardt used to describe the rich as the winners of life's lottery. And the idea is that people who are well off just got lucky, and people who are poor are there for no fault of their own, and so we need to redistribute income. That's like a big thing, so you tax the rich and give to the poor. So, but generally it's about, is government there to make everything equal, to redistribute income, to have a huge welfare system take care of people, or is government there just to keep people from killing each other, keep foreign invaders from taking over your country, to safeguard individual rights, and otherwise should just sort of leave people alone. Now in America, the sort of conservative ideology has married this kind of libertarian idea of individualism with some kind of what's called social conservatism, or some kind of religious moralism that kind of goes along with it. So it's like the conservatives, they're against government handouts, but child tax credits, those are great because we want to support families. Anyway, so this one we're talking, for those that are unfamiliar with the sort of left-right, liberal conservative dichotomy, also the word progressive here. How big should government be and conservative? There are two really big visions. You can look, it goes back to, you look at the philosophers of the Enlightenment. You have John Locke, who's just basically gives the kind of conservative / libertarian individualist approach. And then you have somebody like Rousseau, who is takes more of the collectivist approach. And then you get, different iterations of those as time go on, and the liberal tradition, you sort of end up with Karl Marx, and then on the individualist tradition, you end up with people like, Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman and the sort of free market people. And then, after Marx, you get the Frankfurt School and critical theory, and all this stuff is filtered into academia and represents, the majority of academics all buy into more progressive politics because it's become institutionalized. And then, so that's sort of where the collectivist left-wing stuff has gone. Right-wing, it's interesting, like the sort of conservative ideas have taken over the government now, and Republicans aren't all conservative, but the conservatives are a big wing of the Republican Party, and they control like the majority of governorships, majority of state legislatures, the presidency, and both houses of Congress, although it's the Senate by a narrow margin. So it's sort of odd that everywhere else, culturally and institutionally, the left is on top, but politically, the right is in control for now. This is kind of an unusual thing. It wasn't, for 40 years, the Democrats controlled everything. So now you get this sort of switcheroo, and it's confusing to a lot of people. Anyway, so what I want to talk about, so beyond the left-right dichotomy, there's an even more radical step. Do you think, okay, should I be left-wing or right-wing? Do I want like small government or big government? Well, how about no government at all? So that's the anarchist position.
I would say though, like, what's the definition of small government though? Because like, there's a lot of anarchism that deals with like solidarity, or, like anarchism anthropology for like self-sustained communities.
Right. So it comes to the question: what is a government? Right. That's a good question. Government. What is government? So government is. There's a difference between government and civil society. This is why, like, I think libertarians get a bad rap, because people say, oh, you're libertarian, oh, you just believe in selfishness, and you don't believe in helping people. And people that say that usually think, like, if you don't believe in, like, big government and, like, being taxed to death, that you don't believe in helping people, because they think the only way you help people is through the government. And they don't really trust in charity or benevolent associations or they think these things are sort of filling the holes that government might have, and they confuse civil society with government. Government is a monopoly on the legitimate use of force in a geographic area. This is the idea of the state. The state exists through violence and the threat of violence. The legislature passed laws. It's not all governments are democratic, but even in a democratic government, the legislature passed laws. If you get caught breaking the law, caught speeding, caught stealing, could be some code enforcer finds out your baseboards are half an inch too big, or you put up a fence without a permit or something like that. You're going to get a fine. If you don't pay the fine, they're going to hit you with another fine. You don't pay that fine, they're going to put a lien in your property. If you break too many of these laws, you have like a friend of mine, a stack of unpaid parking tickets. They'll take your ass to jail, right? So, and if you resist, then you get beaten or shot, right? So it's like it's force and the use of force. Why do people pay taxes? Well, it's because if you don't, you have to pay even more.
Side note: you can not resist and still have force behind you.
That's also true, right? So and this is the problem with power, is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you have a government that has a monopoly on the use of force. It has little incentive to try to be kinder and gentler, and this is why You know, security guards at condo associations, like I was once, are very polite to the people that live there. Policemen sometimes are polite and sometimes aren't. Yeah.
Is the only difference between, by that definition, government and say the mob or a cartel or something, is the only difference the word legitimate?
Yep.
And so what makes it legitimate? Is it the congregation and people agreed? that
They
it's
call
legitimate?
themselves the government, and people say, yeah, we respect you.
So almost no difference?
I mean, yeah, it's just the word legitimate there, so I'd say like none.
I guess the mafia doesn't like build roads for us, but the government does. I mean,
Well, it's funny that like you look at a lot of, like the mafia actually, you know, would actually do a lot of like sort of social welfare projects. It's one of the reasons why they're so popular. You look at like even
yeah, I guess like Pablo Escobar kind of
yeah, like
just forking out cash to people.
Hamas is the same thing. Hamas actually became a part of the government. They were a terrorist group. Well, before they were a terrorist group, the way they got to be part of the government
So who
was by
designates-
building roads and hospitals and helping people while they're blowing up, you know, Israeli kids in pizza parlors on the side. Or maybe they're building the hospitals and roads on the side. But now they're part of like the government of Palestinian territories. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I don't know. I want to talk about using that kind of force against people. Not too long ago, during the Dakota Pipeline, they used pretty almost lethal force on civilians, that legitimate, you know, government power. So
Yeah,
again,
so
like,
it's-
to me, there's almost no difference. Just the fact that we agree this one is on top.
Yeah, it's
Has the most money.
And how do we get to the redesignation of like the geographic areas, you know, like, cause our
Everyone's
geographic
stuck in
area
Texas.
has like exceeded from 50 states to like all these other provinces that we have like
Guam,
holdover, that
Puerto
have
Rico.
whole
yeah.
different styles of life that probably shouldn't be re-subjected to a whole new set of laws from a whole separate traditional background on top of that. And then, I mean, like, our states are extremely separated. I mean, like, you have a bunch of red states in the south, and you have all these weird purple states that can't decide what side they want to be on. And then,
Mhm.
like, so how do we redesignate the geographic? Would a Republican be most likely to try to centralize those governments in which, like, you might have a sense of solidarity?
Well, I think
Can't
like
wait to get like
the what's happened in the United States is people like move around so much that like this idea of like having a state identity has sort of fallen by the wayside, and then you get like these sort of ideologies that you know that may cluster in certain areas in majorities, but people are all over the map and people move around, and sometimes people change their mind.
Would not then you want to, like, give those who don't move around, because there's still a portion of the United States who remain local. Like, shouldn't they then have like an overwhelming say-so of like the laws specific on those areas? I mean, like, we have federal laws and like we allow all the states to kind of like come up with their own laws, but they're all generally the same,
Residence
and then
time.
like held together by the U.S. Supreme
Yeah.
Court. Like,
That's an interesting idea.
I mean, the Supreme Court might still ultimately be necessary, but like,
Well, the whole federal system was the idea of local control. So you have like a national government that takes care of basic things like diplomacy and printing money and national defense, and then the states, you know, take care of everything else. That was the original plan. Now, as it turns out, the federal government just got bigger and bigger, and state control gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and the two sort of, you know, meld. In a lot of cases, it's not clear who's in control, and like sometimes the money comes from the feds, and then they attach a bunch of strings to it, so it's not clear like who's calling the tune. Is it the states who have nominal control, or is it the feds who are like supplying all the money to education for grants and loans for like the 21 drinking age is a good case in point. So Oregon used to have an 18 years old drinking age, and then the feds say, hey, you know, you guys want some highway funds this year? Well, you better change that drinking age, because a lot of teenagers get drunk and wreck their cars and kill people, and we need to make it 21. You need to be 21 like everybody else. And so the state of Oregon is hurting for money, wanted to build some roads, and they knuckled under and jacked it up to 21.
is that why they went with the 21 tobacco too?
You know, I'm not sure about that.
Much more just health.
That might just be like the indigenous Democrats, what do you call it? paradoxically now, so can't smoke till you're 21, but you can get a joint, I guess, when you're 21.
Unless you have a medical card, I guess.
The medical card, I don't know if you're 18, you can die for your country, but you can't take a smoke or get a drink.
Yeah.
So you get these weird laws, right? You think about, well, and then you go, oh, well, I guess that's a law, I guess that's what I should do, because the law is the law. And so Stephen Molyneux, who wrote this book, Everyday Anarchy, which I assigned just like 19 pages, there's lots of white spaces, and he questions this idea of the government, about like, well, what is the government inherently legitimate, and do we need a government? So a lot of people will say, well, the government's a necessary evil. But what if it's an unnecessary evil?
I would say government has some benefit just with protection.
Yeah, not really.
I mean, why not though? I mean, I imagine if we didn't have a military at all, and let's say we didn't even have a government, and
I mean, the military is slightly different than the government. I mean, like, they control the military, but like, I
well,
think
the only
we could have
reason
a
the military gets
military-
funded is because we tax and we get
That's
money.
just the method we use now. I'm pretty sure we can come up with an alternative.
Well, just
Like-
it seems like you can pick some things that are big problems, right? So
Yeah.
usually what people mention is like national defense, with the
Yeah, that's my best.
the police. So those are the two things you
Just
mentioned,
automate it.
and then maybe the roads, right? Who's going to build the roads?
Yeah, one day I believe that absolutely.
So one of the things that Molyneux talks about, he talks about like, okay, in your ordinary life, like, who do you want to be calling the shots in your day-to-day life? You're picking like who you're gonna marry, where you're gonna work, what you're gonna do, like, for your day, right?
Somebody who knows who I am for the best decision.
Well, who would that be?
You.
Depending on the religious background, either a priest or like a teacher, professor, like.
Well, why would that be you though? I mean, you can pick somebody to help give you advice or something, but it seems like the person who knows what's best for you is you.
But I mean, like, that's for me, and like, now we are in like a society of other people, so like, what's right for me isn't right for everybody, but at the same time, it's like, I can decide what's right for me, but only when it regards me and only me, or people who've agreed to
Yeah,
the
like
like theoretical outcome.
I think I should go steal a piano, but someone would probably say no to that.
Right. So that's this idea of.
Seems good to me, but
So like the anarchists, or at least, you know, Molyneux is like an individualist anarchist, and they still believe in property, and this idea is property is like, property is a natural thing. It's like property in like territory, right? So you have, you know, you got a dog, and the dog, you know, when a stranger comes, he barks, right? Could say, hey, look out! There's somebody there that doesn't belong here. Are they friend or foe? I don't know. We're gonna have to scrutinize them before we let them in, right? And that's sort of a natural thing. This is my territory. This is under my control. My home is my castle, and your dog is there, letting you know, hey, there's somebody coming in. And if you give the dog a bone, and he's chewing on it, enjoying it, and you try to take it away from him, he's gonna hold on to it. He's like, that's my bone. You gave it to me. I'm not gonna give it back to you. And that's like, you know, people are like that too. People acquire property. They acquire it through work, or some through land. Land maybe is a special issue there, but through I think Molyneux thinks you can take care of that through homesteading. But people acquire property through the use of their life and their liberty, and they acquire property. And so this idea that persons have rights not to be assaulted or killed, and not to have things stolen or destroyed that belong to them. And those are natural rights that don't depend on the government at all. Yeah.
I like what you said about ownership and territory with the dog and, you know, the area, but also another way of looking at it, like sharing is also part of nature. Pretty sure I mentioned this before, but otters, they can eat up to like 25, 30 things in their environment, but they only eat up to 3 things in their entire lifetime, because they're like, oh, I'm eating this. I'm sure this isn't the thought process, but like,
Sure.
oh, I'm eating this, and then the other one's like eating that, so it's a more balanced ecosystem. I'm just saying, like, other ways of treating, like, also the territory, like, you know, they'll go from place to place, here to there. They don't
Yeah.
actually have a marked, this is mine, I'm never leaving. So there's other ways, like, to,
would the reason that they share their food, they only choose to eat those 3 things, is because if they start eating other things, that puts them in
they
a
are
more dangerous
keystone,
situation?
they are keystone species, and if they were to be removed or replaced or anything, every animal in the area would be affected. So it's kind of a sense of balance and, I guess, sharing and unity.
But there's a difference
Tough to
between,
call it sharing.
I think, the like redistribution of income by the government, like taking from, you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and people like engaging in charity, right? So I have stuff that I own. It doesn't belong to you, but I see you're down and out, so I'm gonna give you some of the stuff that I own. That's charity.
Yeah, I was,
On the other hand, if someone points a gun at me and says, hey, Borrowdale, you got a lot of stuff, and Daniel over there doesn't have very much stuff, give me some of your stuff, and I'm gonna keep a little for myself, and I'm gonna give some of it to Daniel. Right, and that's essentially what the government does with a progressive tax system. And so, and I think what Molyneux would say is that, you know, giving to those in genuine need is noble. Stealing from people to give those you think is deserving with using violence to do so is despicable. And
Without violence, what would it be then? Still despicable, like the act of.
I suppose if you steal in the middle of the night or you're sneaky about it.
yeah.
If I was like, if I was like the role model Robin Hood.
Yeah, I think
Government
it's still,
just slowly siphons out 5 cents from everyone's bank account without anyone
yeah, they
knowing.
give it through fraud or currency devaluation is another way the government does it, or through inflation. They print a bunch of money and lend it out to the Federal Reserve at 0% interest, and then the money that you still have goes down. Unless you bought Bitcoin, in which case, what are you doing here? Yeah.
But so like, there's the whole like, I know what's best for me. Like, I kind of make my own laws and rules for me per se, but at the same time, like, when those clash with other people, because everybody's ended up clashing, like, I don't want a general ruling, but I still want like a very specific, like, this is me and the person who's affected, and me, the third party who knows both of us for the best consensus still. Like,
Yeah,
still
and that's
a
like,
judicial system, but it's got to be very, very centralized to like.
right, so this is like you have arbitration, right? So there's private law, and so like, you know, if I run into a problem with the college and we have a disagreement, where we both agreed to go to binding arbitration, so the union will go on my behalf, and you know, the union's also a private organization, and the court's not involved at all. They find some person who's a professional arbitrator, and we go together and make our case, and the person decides, and we both agree to go on the verdict. So you don't need a government court necessarily to settle disputes. You might do everything by arbitration. Now, typically, like, the courts are seen as court of last resort, but often they're actually, in practice, they're the first place people go.
Yeah, the state tends to pick up a lot of victimless crimes, or crimes that the victims choose to not be a victim and have like outside resolution. There's been a lot, like, the state will pick up the case and pursue it without the victim.
Yep, that's
and
true.
Be like, the fact is, we just want to prove that you did this, not whether like this case has been resolved or not. The fact that you did it is all that matters now.
Yeah, like a person with typically a man with an underage girlfriend. Sometimes lately it's been like the school teachers with the teenage boys. The boys loving it. So the underage person relationship is happy with it. The parents approve of it. The person maybe 16. I think 17 is legal in some way. Say a 16-year-old, and maybe like maybe somebody in their 20s, and so somebody gets wind of it, and they're like, oh, this is a crime, and the state will actually prosecute the crime, even though the person who's involved in the relationship says that they're not a victim. The parents approve of it, and the state will come in and say, well, this is statutory rape, you're a sex offender, you're going to prison, right? So that's the example, or there's lots of cases like these. Prostitution is another good example of a victimless crime or drug use or what have you. Let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back, talk a little bit more of this, and then do some reviewing for the final.
High school, that's
Long
basically
term,
what I
maybe.
got told every day.
All right, we're back.
Here's a good
So,
one for you.
let's, just think I'll call up, oh, I just wanted to, I just wrote this on here, like, again, the more progressive view is that people are heavily influenced, if not determine their behavior by systems of power, by social forces they don't have any control over, by accidents of birth, and that's sort of what sets your course in life. And whereas the more conservative right-wing view says that you have agency, that you're in control of your destiny, that you have responsibility for where you end up in life, and even if you end up, being born poor and a minority, you could end up like Clarence Thomas and be on the Supreme Court. And it's all up to you. And it has to do with these sort of, it has to do with individual initiative and cultivating certain virtues. And that's, I suppose, that the kind of moralistic part of conservatism is that you have to be successful in life. You have to have certain virtues like hard work, determination, persistence. You have to be tough and smart and sort of, and conscientious. And then if you do that, you'll be successful. Whereas whereas the more kind of collectivist idea is that you could do all those things, you could still end up on the bottom, and it's sort of a matter of luck whether you end up doing well in life or not. And I'd say, like, you think about things like majors. If you're going to be an art history major, God bless you, but you're probably not going to make a lot of money, or you're going to have to really, really hustle. Same thing if you want to be a musician or artist, you have to have hustle. There's people that are like really good, but they have to pick up the business end, they have to learn how to market themselves. And particularly if you want to be in the arts, it's an uphill climb, and you're probably going to not make very much money and have problems supporting yourself, unless you like bust your ass with hustle and learn how to be street savvy and learn a little bit about business. But if you become like you major in economics, engineering, some of the technical fields, you can get like a degree here in networking, and within a few years you're probably making 50 grand a year, and you're just up from there. Your computer science and networking together is even better. So you can earn a really good living, and you can look at you can look at like there are websites that show like how much people earn in different fields, and figure out what it is. And this, I suppose, this comes with like thinking critically about your life, right? It's all about being proactive and making decisions. You think about, well, what's really important to me, and you might change your mind later, right? So, but this idea, oops, I think I created a blank page here. Shoot, there's government here. So you think about like thinking critically about your life. So you think about like what are my values? And this, part of this is objective, part of it's subjective, right? So you think about like what would be what would be the life of virtue, or what would be a noble life, right? And those are kind of, those are values that aren't just sort of matters of personal taste. Those are things that are sort of more objective. Think about having an objectively meaningful, purposeful life. And then there's this question about like personal taste. So here, what do I like? Maybe I'll just to distinguish these things. So what are my values? You know, if your values are about like, you know, helping people, probably tobacco company executive is probably not a good line of work for you. Or maybe even like you could be a lawyer and help people, but it might not be the best way to help people. And it might be that maybe you believe in helping people and you'd like to be like a lawyer and like do a lot of pro bono work and take care of people on the bottom of society. But then the question is, what do you like to do? Do you like to pore over like law books and like put on a suit and tie and, you know, show up in court and spend long hours going over like legal briefs? Maybe that would be horrible to you. Like I have a brother who's used to be an accountant, hated it and finally couldn't hack it anymore and ended up being asked not to come back to work because he didn't show up too many days. And part of it is because his life as an accountant sucks so much, he's, you know, trying to numb the pain with alcohol. So you don't want to end up like that. So thinking critically, you think about trying to design your life from the ground up, thinking about, okay, what do I care about? What's important to me? What are my ethical values, my moral values? What kind of person am I? What would I like my life to be? And then you think about, well, what do I like to do? And then the question about is, you know, how can I do it for money? And you think about that, and then this comes to like this practical things, right? So this is a practical question, and that like if your values are the most important thing, and you don't want to pay attention to practical things at all, you can think, okay, well here's the thing I love. I love making music, say, right? I want to be a professional musician. Well, that's going to be really it's a tough gig, and people do it, right? I had a student, I used to teach this class called Philosophy of Success, the Philosophy of Success. Mm-hmm. And it was about like sort of thinking about your values and goals, and I had students, you know, write them up and have like a 6-month plan, a 1-year plan, a 5-year plan, and thinking about these things proactively. And so you think about, well, how can I turn my, you know, how can I make my vocation my vacation, right? How can I take something I love? And there was a guy in the class, and he like toured Europe as a musician. Now the thing is, like, he, you know, stayed in like hostels, and I think he had hardly made any money. He was coming back to school to try to get a straight job, and taking some classes, and so that's, you know, and he was like, I think he was in his 40s, right? So he's got a daughter he has to take care of, and so it's, you know, tough being he's a really great musician and played all over. I think he was in Greece. He was some kind of stringed instrument. It's something kind of exotic too. So, but you know, there's something to be said for the vagabond lifestyle, I suppose. But just, you know, think about these things, and then think about like another thing is you think about things like your health. Money. And even thinking critically about like relationships. Think about all these things. These are areas where people tend to check their brain at the door. So people will engage in really bad habits like drinking alcohol on a regular basis, copious amounts of it. You know, after a while, you become addicted to it and you can't stop. And you could end up like in rehab 10 times, right? like a person I know in my family he's been to rehab 10 times and he's still drinking. Or like there's a faculty member here at the college that he had part of his lung taken out and he's still smoking, lung cancer.
God.
Right? So you think about like the long-term effects of stuff you're doing now, or like how much money you're putting away, or whether you're buying Bitcoin, right? And so or whether you're slogging stuff away for the future, and all that stuff. This is where those irrational sort of non-critical things come in, right? So you're thinking, oh, it's not that bad for me, right? So you have again this rationalization. Why? Because you enjoy smoking, right? And maybe you tell yourself, I enjoy smoking, and so even though it might not be so good for me, I'm going to keep on doing it because it's not going to hurt me that much, and over time, I'll quit eventually, right? And I suppose you think about this, about your goals too. So rationalizations, I'll do it tomorrow. It's not that bad for me. It's not that bad, period. If I had $1 for every time I said to myself, it'll be fine, and it wasn't fine. So just, and this is like practical everyday stuff. So think about, okay, this is my life, this is how I want it to be. I'm going to be proactive and think about my health and my finances and my relationships, whether they serve me or not, and not just get sucked into it and think, well, you see people that, like women that get in abusive relationships where they're actually beaten by their partner. And you wonder, well, why did anybody stay in a relationship like that? Well, it's all these sorts of things where you get locked into seeing things a certain way. And you think, oh, I probably deserve it. Or you get used to certain things. And you get into habits. And you maybe develop a negative self-concept. Why else would my partner be beating me if I didn't deserve it? And you get into this sort of downward spiral. And so, but then people will look at someone who's in a domestic abuse relationship, and then maybe they'll have like a partner that's emotionally abusive, say, or and they won't see the connection there at all. So typically, it's really easy to pick the splinter out of your brother's eye, but it's not so easy to see the log in your own, to quote Jesus. So anyway, just a little bit about thinking critically about your life. So take like these things that we've been talking about, like bias and being reflective and wondering, these pitfalls of defensiveness and rationalization, and just always take a step back and ask yourself, am I seeing things here clearly? Is this really good for me? Am I listening to my friends, or I'm sort of like distancing from them? Am I thinking about this objectively, or am I going on my feelings or impulses? Am I trying to push away unpleasant things I don't want to think about? And even though in the short term that might pay off, in the long term it's probably not going to serve you. All right, let's do a little reviewing. Let's see. I should have got some water during the break. So we started out talking about thinking critically about religion. And we talked about clashes between religion and modernity. So modernity is this term, it's an academic term that maybe you haven't heard before, and we talked about that it's something that started in the modern period. The modern period is like the 17th century, basically. Maybe going back to the 16th century. We might go back to Descartes. 16th, 17th century. Around the time of the Renaissance, scientific revolution, And so this includes modern science, so modernity includes science. You had Francis Bacon, the scientific method. Also, like new forms of new political institutions. This idea that people have individual liberty and individual rights, that there shouldn't be a state church, but church and state should be separate, and you should be free to practice whatever religion you want to. And this idea of freedom of speech, you should be able to say whatever you like, and the government shouldn't suppress it. Now this stuff, didn't come all at once, so it came slowly, but the beginnings of this in Europe came around the 16th, 17th century. So you get modern science, modern political systems, respect for individual liberty, individual rights, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and this idea of representative democracy, equality under law, free market capitalism. All those things are innovations and marked a break from feudalism, which was all about the aristocracy controlling everything, or the church controlling everything. Can't say whatever you want. You might get thrown in the dungeon for blasphemy. If you run afoul of the Catholic Church, you're going to get punished. If you're Galileo and you're teaching that the sun revolves, that the earth revolves around the sun, you might find yourself under house arrest and threatened with torture, right? So a big break from the Middle Ages when you have the advent of all these things that we call modern science, modern political institutions, modern conceptions of human rights and ethics. And so you get clashes with these religious texts, which are ancient, which have a kind of primitive tribal morality, with and also primitive ways of looking at the world scientifically, is before the advent of science. And they clash with these modern institutions. So you have religions that say things that appear to contradict science, like in the book of Joshua, God makes the sun stand still. Well, what does that imply? It implies that the sun is moving around the earth, not the earth revolving on its axis, going around the sun. And you can understand, like a person you're writing in whenever the Old Testament was written, and say sometime between the book of Joshua, let's say sometime between 1200 and 500 BC or something. So you have people who are very ancient, like a nomadic desert people, and their descendants maybe writing these stories, and probably based on an oral tradition that lasted a long time before that. And people think that the sun revolves around the earth, and so, but once it gets institutionalized, then Galileo has a telescope, and he's like can see that that's not the way things go, and he gets repressed by the church. Now, no Christian living in a modern country today thinks the earth is the center of the universe, right? So there's a concession to modernity, where even the most fundamentalist Christian in the U.S. doesn't believe that the earth doesn't believe that the sun revolves around the earth. And now this goes to the kind of the liberal interpretation of the text. So this is one way people deal with clashes with science, is they reinterpret the text to match modern ways of thinking. Some other examples of like clashes, you have support in religions for theocracy in the Old Testament. In the religion of Islam in particular, you have the idea that church and state should be one. This is why you have lots of theocratic governments that are run by clerics, like in Iran. And then you even in governments that are ostensibly secular, like Turkey, you have like a huge religious influence. And then those that are, where the majority are Islamic, but they're not run by clerics, they tend to be run by military dictatorships that basically through force keep the fundamentalists at bay. So, so you see in various religions, they say church and state should be part of the same thing, or you see examples of sexism, or you see examples of classism. So you have like things that say women should be treated as second-class citizens. that they should be under the authority of their husbands or fathers, that they shouldn't be able to teach religious doctrine because they can't be trusted. I think I'm trying to remember where this is in the Hadith or the Quran, where a woman is a field that her husband may plow when he will. And so you have lots of different, and this is not just, you get this in all the religions, right? You get genocides in the Old Testament, so you have God commanding the Jews to go wipe out the indigenous people of Canaan and burn all their buildings to the ground, tear down all their temples and altars, and take over. And God says, this is your land, drive the people out, destroy all their stuff, although take the valuables and give it to the priests, right? So that, and all this stuff you find in religious texts, it's easy, you can find lots of bad stuff in all major world religions. Stigmatization of homosexuals, again, like the caste system in India, that's like a religious teaching, right? So you have, I think no religion is immune from it. In Buddhism, you have this group called the Hungry Ghosts, that, and it's like basically a primitive explanation for bacterial decomposition. So that's, so you can find lots of things that contradict like modern science, modern ethics, modern ways of thinking. And the question, if you're a person of faith, what do you do? Well, one response is fundamentalism. You say, well, that's like the decadent modern Western culture that's telling me that all my religious beliefs aren't valid, and it's just wrong, right? So you get people that don't believe in the theory of evolution, for example. Or you'll get people who'll say, well, this is what the secular atheistic scientists say, but this is what my holy book says, and we go with the holy book. The other way you can go is you can think, and you can take like a more metaphorical or liberal interpretation of religion. So you say, okay, well, this is what the text says, but if you look at this in a metaphorical way, it's a wonderful moral lesson. I don't believe it literally, but I'm going to believe it spiritually. And that's often what people do, and even like very intellectual people will say, I'm a member of one of these world religions, and this is the way I reconcile this is like, no, I don't believe that the earth is the center of the universe, but that's just the way somebody saw it back then. It's just describing how it looked to them. Or they'll say, well, this is the way people did things back then, but that's not how we do things today. And then people will say, well, maybe this is like inspired by God, but doesn't mean that everything in it is right, and maybe sometimes I didn't hear God so good, right? And so you'll get liberal mainline denominations that will kind of soft pedal the more metaphysical teachings, stuff, and particularly stuff about Satan and demons and miracles, and they'll focus on things like the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor, and blessed are the peacemakers," and tells you to turn the other cheek and love your enemies, and seek God's kingdom. Don't worry. Like, there's lots of stuff that most people in modern societies can agree with. And then when it comes to stuff about the apocalypse and the end of the world and heaven and hell and all this more sort of I would say more religious stuff, right? They'll say, well, it's and even like the resurrection, people will say it's a metaphor for the triumph of the human spirit. And so that's one way that people will try to reconcile their faith with the modern world. Now the question is, is that, I suppose in some way you might see that's like critical thinking, because you recognize that science is valid, that the modern world has something going for it that your ancient book might not have. Yeah.
Isn't it also a bit of relativism? I mean, you can take the words said to you based on the ancient text or word of mouth or anything, and you can warp it to anything you want it to be, as long as so that it correlates with the things you can't deny.
It's a good point, and I think that that as I expressed in class, like it depends on like what your intention is. So if you're saying this is what the text actually means, then no, you're engaging like a kind of a mental game where you're treating it like as a Rorschach test. It's like an ink blot that means whatever you want it to mean. And text, have determinate meanings. They say they have words in the language that mean a certain thing. Now, you can look at it and say, well, I don't believe it. I don't believe it literally, but I think this is like a good story that helps me in my life, and it's part of my culture or something like that. That seems like it's a legitimate way to go.
Well, in terms of like, for example, God made the world in 7 days.
Yeah.
But now people talk about the Big Bang and they're like, oh, well, a day, the 7 days, each day is an eon. And
Right, yeah.
so technically I'm still not wrong.
Right,
and
yeah.
this is also true.
And so that, now there you have to be careful of like, again, this like idea of rationalization. You think, okay, well, I want to believe in science, but I also want to believe in my religion. And I have this problem where I have cognitive dissonance, right? Where I'm like, this seems like it's true, but this seems like it's true. Whoa, what do I do, right? And so but I don't want to pick one because I don't want to give up science because that would be irrational, but I also want to give up my religion. And so people will say, okay, well, the 7 days in Genesis are like figurative days, they're not literal days. Even though it says an evening and a morning, 1 day in the text. And even though the word day means day most of the time, and context matters, right? So sometimes, like if you say day, like, this is the day of the Lord when God's going to come back and establish his kingdom on earth. And that might be interpreted as age. And there's some cases where it's obvious that day means day. And you can take, like Jesus says, I'm the bread of life, right? Jesus isn't a loaf of Wonder Bread. It's obviously a metaphor. But in the Garden of Eden story, when it says, on the first day, God did this, and it says an evening and morning, 1 day, and it's using day in like a normal, in context, you take the literal meaning first, unless there's some reason to see it as metaphorical. But you might say, well, I don't believe in 7-day creation, but I believe God created the world through the Big Bang, and the story is just, you might say it's poetic. And it's not literally true, but it's kind of like a poetical description of the earth being created in different stages based on the understanding of a person at the time. It's kind of a weak view of inspiration, but the idea is that this isn't like how things literally happen, but I'm going to see it as sort of like a story that is transmitted through culture but has some divine origin. So that's one way you go. Now the problem with that is maybe it collapses into what you're saying, which is like, well, my view can still be true even though it contradicts science. But in another way, you might think, well, would you rather have a person hold on to their religious belief in sort of a symbolic way and embrace science, or would you rather have them reject science?
We're all gonna go camping in whale stomachs this weekend.
Yeah, so it's like Jonah and the whale, right? So some people look at it and say, well, unless that story is literally true, then I'm going to abandon my religious beliefs. And other people will say, well, it's a metaphor. It's about it's about a person running away from God and what God told him to do. It's about the reason that Jonah is running away is he doesn't want to preach he doesn't want to preach a message of repentance because he hates the Ninevites. And he wants God to destroy them. And so he doesn't want to preach the message of repentance to them because he hates their guts and he wants them dead, right? So, and so he tries to run away, and then God engineers this thing to kind of teach Jonah a lesson. And so, if you go to a Lutheran church or a Episcopalian church, you'll probably get a message that's about running away from God. Are you running away from God? And the idea is thinking about running away from your problem or not letting God help you through the tough times, and rather than this idea that, oh, this is how it could literally have happened, and here are some cases of fishermen who were swallowed by whales and survived, right? The idea is the literal meaning doesn't really matter. So that's the more liberal interpretation. Now, you run into some interesting things like the guys in the story there, they draw lots to see who the guy that ticked off God, and Jonah gets the short straw. And so it sort of implies that like that if you want to figure out who's pissed off God, you just draw lots, and that will give you an accurate understanding of who the one that offended God with. So I mean that's like a superstition, right? This idea that if there's a big storm, then God's angry. And so how do you figure out who the evildoer is? You draw lots, and the guy with the short straw is the guy that ticked off God, and you throw him overboard. Well, that's not a very good model for doing things. But I think that the liberal person would say, well, of course I don't believe that, but that's what people believed at the time. It's part of the story. I'm a modern person, but I also believe in God. And I see this just as a story that has a nice moral lesson. I don't take it literally. Now, if you recognize that the story was intended literally, but you're going to have this new sort of interpretation, reject the literal and accept the metaphorical, that's different than saying, oh no, the person that wrote this didn't mean it to be a literal story, it's a parable, which isn't the case. That's doing violence to the text, wrenching out of its historical context. And if you want to say, well, there's no resurrection taught in the New Testament, that it's meant as a metaphor for the triumph of the human spirit, that's false, right? But if you want to say, oh, it's I don't believe literally the bodies can come back from the dead, or that they ever did. Maybe they could, but they never did. But I'm going to take this as a metaphor. I'm going to believe it literally, but I believe it kind of spiritually, and it's a nice, uplifting story. Then that's different. So that's kind of like the liberal response. And yeah, I go both ways in this. I don't know what you guys think about this. Like, so what's the... So should you say, unless it's literally true, I should junk this religion completely and just be an atheist and completely secular person? Or can you kind of hold on to the traditions as long as you sort of recognize that it's sort of a mixed bag of stuff, and you can kind of pick and choose what makes sense to reconcile it with your modern beliefs?
I guess it'd be fair to turn the Bible into like a form of Aesop's fables, maybe?
Yeah, that's a way. Again, you look at your Methodists and your Episcopalians and your Lutherans. Not all of them. There's some conservatives, but by the most part, they're like really liberal, and you get like a lot of teaching about like ethics, and they call it the social gospel. There's a lot of political agitation there too, and you get a lot of kind of humanistic teachings and cloaked in religious dressing, right? So that's the liberal response. Okay, let me move on here. So an advantage of that is you can kind of acknowledge the literary or moral value of some text while rejecting like the anti-scientific and or beliefs which conflict with modern notions of ethics. I talked about that guy Cross and John Dominic Cross, and he was asked if God existed in the Jurassic period, the period of dinosaurs, and he said it was a meaningless question, which shows you can be an Episcopal priest and an atheist at the same time, right? And as long as you put on the robe and do your thing, you come in there and talk about like humanistic philosophy, and you use the word God, but when you say God, you don't really mean God, you just mean some sort of like symbol. And that's the same thing with this guy Rudolf Bultmann I talked about, who talks about God as being the ground of being, which is kind of like this concept from existentialism. So God's not like a literal spiritual being who created the universe. It's sort of like a metaphor for being. And what did like the continental philosophers mean by being? I have no idea. But it's this thing out of German philosophy, the concept of being or existence, and existentialism. So really, I mean, is Bultmann a Lutheran? Yeah, I'd say he's like an existentialist who like in Lutheran clothing. And he thinks it's all about the symbols and Christianity and doesn't believe any of it literally. And he had this idea you should demythologize the New Testament and sort of try to figure out what maybe really happened and what's just myth and get rid of the myths, because they confuse people.
Well, then we'd have to do the same with the Greeks, wouldn't we?
Well, they're like, I suppose, like, I think he would have the same idea of like Greek mythology. Is like nobody believes that Zeus hurls down thunderbolts from Mount Olympus.
But like to remove the mythology part would kind of destroy like the meaning of this
Well, I
metaphor.
think he would say that like, you know, that the idea that all these gods and goddesses are like symbols, and they're meaningful to us because, you know, the stories kind of resonate with, they kind of bubble up from the unconscious mind. It's
Like-
kind of like a Jungian interpretation of mythology.
I feel like it's the water in which we use to like thin down what we want to accept about the world. Instead of just having the hard black and white facts of like, you know, we just kind of like took these human virtues and characteristics and then deified them and then made this mythology of the Greek gods. People
Yeah.
wouldn't take to it as well as like reading the stories of the gods and the heroes and then like the mortals and this story upon which they can relate their life and like correlate to it versus like a black and white fact. Like reading the DSM, you're less likely to
Yeah.
understand.
And this idea is humans are storytelling animals. It's part of our heritage. It's part of our psychology. And so I think like somebody like Bultmann or Kratzen say that you should look at religion the way you look at Greek mythology. Nobody believes in Greek mythology literally. They see all these gods as being sort of symbols of human archetypes. You know, the father figure and the mother figure and you know, the hero, and there's this, you know, the hero's journey, and it's sort of like your journey through life, and it's all a bunch of metaphors to help us understand ourselves. And if you look at religion like that, then it can be useful. If you believe in like this sort of spiritual world, and you believe in miracles and angels and demons and all this stuff literally, then you've got a foot in the Middle Ages, and it's a problem, and you're not thinking critically. That would be what you know, Crossman and Bultmann would say. About the story of Narcissus, right? So this is where we get narcissism from. So Narcissus is staring at his own reflection in a pool, and he's captivated with it, and he's so enamored with his own reflection that he falls into the pool and drowns. All right, so what is that? What's that story about? Well, it's about, you know, don't be so obsessed with yourself that you destroy yourself. Think about other people. Don't be vain, right? There's a story with a moral to it, and the idea is that you don't literally believe in the god Narcissus exists, or I don't know if he's a god or a demigod or what, but if you don't literally believe that story happened, and you don't have to believe it literally to have it have some value. This phrase, we talked about the phrase "there are many roads to God," and basically that means that although religions might be different, they all lead to the same place. And the problem with that is like, why would you think, like, without examining any of the world's religions, why would you assume that they're all valid? And it's a nice thing to think about, but there's no reason a priori, before examining all the religions, to think that they're all going to be equally good. And then there's this other idea that all the religions are all the same, which is also empirically false. And we talked about differences between Eastern and Western religions, different concept of God. In the West, the human problem is seen as sin, and we need to be saved. And you know, Jesus is a blood atonement. Or other Western religions like Judaism and Islam say you just have to repent of your sins and God forgives you. Whereas the East sees your problems as being desire and attachment to the material world, ignorance, and the West sees the problems as being not ignorance but willful disobedience to God. And so there's like big differences between Eastern and Western religions, between particular religions, between sects of religions. So they teach very different things. And so if you're trying to figure out like which of these religions are true, you might look at them and look at like internal consistency. You might see, you know, whether their text contradicts known facts of history or science or intuitively held moral beliefs. And I had a quote from Locke, which I have on the exam here. I'll read it to you. Whatever God hath revealed is certainly true. No doubt could be made of it. This is the proper object of faith. But whether it be divine revelation or no, reason must judge. Right? So this is an argument against this idea that all spiritual judgments should be based on faith, and reason is only appropriate to the material world. Right? So Locke says, okay, well, yeah, if this is really a revelation from God, if like say the Bible is really the Word of God, then if it says that the Bible says something, then it's obviously true if it's written by God.
But we have to reason whether or not the Bible was the word of God.
Exactly, yeah. So you can't sidestep the need for critical thinking by saying, well, just believe. The question is, well, what do you believe in? Should I believe in the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, should I believe in the Tao Te Ching, all these different religions, right? They have all of the Quran, Old Testament, New Testament, Old Testament, New Testament, and Quran. Like, what am I going to believe in? And then if there's contradictions between them, what am I going to do? Like if the Quran says Jesus isn't the Son of God, and then and Judaism says he's not the Son of God, but Christianity says he is, and that's like the most important thing. I can't believe in all three of them, right? So, and then I got all these Eastern religions that have a totally different concept of God. So you can't believe all the religions are true, at once. So you can do some things like looking at the character of the founder, look at the teachings and see whether they're self-consistent or consistent with the facts as we know them, and make a judgment. Pascal's wager, talked about that for a bit, and the idea is that believing in God's a bet you can't lose, that you're always better wagering on God because the worst you can do is you're always going to win something. You'll have a good life, you'll have hope, you'll have meaning, and then what's the best you can do if you don't believe in God? Break even. Well, who would take that bet? And one of the problems we talked about is that Pascal seems to kind of soft pedal the sacrifices required of religious life, and he also plays up things. Yeah, the good parts.
Are there any specific terms that we should know for the exam?
Let me look here. Let me finish going through this, and I'll see if I'll review it in just like the last couple of minutes. I'll see if I can find a couple of terms. You should be careful about the awe of the ancients. So most religions developed in a time of ignorance and superstition. So that should make you approach them skeptically instead of falling prey to the psychological power of the awe of the ancients. And then also we talked about the evolution of religion. So religion didn't just sort of plunk down from heaven. That you can trace the evolution of religions from belief in these kind of finite human-like gods to more sophisticated forms, and that also might make you suspicious when you see this fully developed religion. You think, well, where did this come from? And it looks like it evolved from more primitive forms. Let's see. Oh, another reason to be suspicious of religious claims is you have this innate desire to live, to survive, and religion promises you an afterlife. So it deals with your fear of death. It provides you meaning and value, and so it should lead you to question your objectivity for accepting it.
Unless you read Nietzsche.
We talked about thinking critically about ethics. Evolutionary psychology suggests that human nature, that ethics evolved as part of human nature and kind of evolved as an abstract version of family and kinship ties, of our in-group behavior with our clan, our tribe. And so there's this idea, I take care of me and mine, my family. And then there's this further idea, well, all men are brothers, right? It's a title from a book by Gandhi. And thinking about the human family and this idea and so it's kind of an abstraction of these evolutionary feelings that we have for taking care of members of our community, and it sort of gets abstracted to the whole world. I got 2 minutes here. College professors are liberal, unionized, upper middle class government workers. So be careful what they say. They might have an interest in getting you to believe certain things. We talked about the Frankfurt School, which is largely responsible for the progressive bent of academia. A bunch of German intellectuals came over from Frankfurt, Germany. The workers' revolution never happened, so they decided to go after college students, basically, get into academia, and try to start a cultural revolution based on grievance, based on race and gender and sexual repression. And they started critical theory and political correctness, both came from the Frankfurt School. And then you get the Frenchies, and they come with postmodernism. People like Derrida and Jacques Lacan, they import this relativistic and nihilistic philosophy that also takes over academia in order to sort of push their agenda forward. So that's all we have time for a review. I'll post some sample questions on